I see in the 30s, women start to experience symptoms. Some can last until the 40s, some 50s, but I've seen perimenopause symptoms start as early as in the 30s in many of my patients.
Hey there! Welcome to the Evolving Ageless podcast. This is the Enlightened Woman's Antidote to Aging. I'm Michelle Dreilich. I am your host, and I am on a mission to change the way women age. Right? So each week, I'm joined by experts in their field that share the latest and greatest research to help us live ageless. So I'm super excited today because I have a hormone expert that's going to join us, and we're going to dive really deep today. So I want to welcome Dr. Stephanie Gray. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you here. So, Stephanie is a functional medicine provider. She's in the Midwest. She's done her doctorate in estrogen metabolism. We're going to talk a lot about estrogen today, all the hormones, but she really is an expert in this area. She works with women and men to help them live sustainable, optimal lives, right? Her focus is on longevity. And I know we talk about longevity and it's in the news a lot lately. And if you followed me, you know that's staying at the top of the hill as long as you can, right? It's extending not only the length of your life, and sometimes not even the length of your life, but the quality of your life and the way you live. And so, what an amazing focus for all of us. Her expertise is in not only hormones, but integrative functional medicine and anti-aging. She is absolutely one of the Midwest's most certified, credentialed female health practitioners out there. So if you live in Iowa, she's your gal. She's also the acclaimed author of Your Longevity Blueprint. It's a book, and we're going to talk about how this book is wonderfully laid out to help you live your best life for longevity. So, welcome again, Stephanie. It's so good to have you here.
Well, good morning. Again, thank you for having me on. I look forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. So, let's start off first with the book because I just love the approach that you took. I think it's so easily understandable and it applies to our everyday lives. It was wonderful. So, let's talk about that approach specifically. What influenced it? What made you think about it?
Yeah, well, I actually have gone through many of my own health challenges. I'm sitting at my desk years ago. I had very fast heart rate. Long story short, I didn't quite know what was happening. I ended up in the emergency room and at Mayo Clinic, and I was told to take a medication to control my heart rate. And I thought, taking a medication isn't going to tell me why this is happening to me, right? As a functional medicine provider, I try to help my patients get to the root cause of their problems. And now suddenly I needed help getting to the root cause of mine. My husband's our office manager, and around this time, he said, I think we need to create an outline or a blueprint or a roadmap, something that's going to help you rebuild your health and something that we can then give to our patients. So I really just tried to put into a book all the principles that we had been using in our practice, but I wanted to create an analogy. And I was also challenged by my own health as well, to kind of clarify what needed to be done for myself and what patients need to do to rebuild their health. So, just like how we know to maintain our homes, we mow our lawns, hopefully, we keep hair out of the drains, we're changing our furnace filters. There are things that we're doing on a daily basis to maintain our homes. And I think patients don't always know how to maintain their bodies, what we need to do to be rebuilding our health. And so I tried to, in this book, compare how we maintain our home to how we should be maintaining our body. So I go chapter by chapter and I compare. Chapter one is the gastrointestinal system, which I think is the foundation of health. So I'm comparing that to the foundation of the home. You have to have a strong foundation upon which to build good health. And so I'm essentially just comparing again a room or we'll say a location service that the house provides us with an organ system in the body. And chapter six is all about the endocrine system. It's about our hormones. So I'm comparing that in our body to the heating and cooling system in our home. You don't want to be cold, you don't want to be hot, right? You want to have
Right.
good, efficient heating and cooling. And that's where the endocrine system comes in, which is my top passion and what I needed help with also.
Which is cool because heating and cooling, right? Very often the symptoms that women experience later in life have to do with heating and cooling. So it was a great analogy. I really enjoyed it. All right, so let's get in. Let's talk about these hormones. I know we've talked in the past about just the big picture of hormones and how in a woman's life, we go through so many changes compared to men whether it's puberty or pregnancy or menopause. We have all of these cycles that we go through. Let's talk about how that affects us as women and what implication that has for our health as we age.
Yeah, hormones are extremely important, and obviously, I have been working with my patients to optimize those for years. But I recently even had, we were discussing before we started this interview today, that I just finished breastfeeding. So I had a child recently, and
Right.
I got to experience firsthand what hot flashes were like after delivery, right? Your hormones are so high as you're pregnant, you feel amazing and euphoric, and you have this baby, and then hormones can really crash. And so I got to experience, and now I can empathize with my patients a little better who are going through different hormone shifts, how important those hormones are. Estrogen helps with memory. It helps with hot flashes, like I was experiencing. Can help prevent night sweats. It's great for bone density. It's great for skin and for collagen. Progesterone is very soothing, calming. It's great for anxiety and PMS. It can reduce heavy bleeding. And progesterone is something I needed help with also. And I had an infertility struggle. And so I needed progesterone even through my pregnancy. Testosterone is great for mood, motivation, drive, libido, energy, and bone density. All of them are good for bone density. They help us age well. They help prevent the memory loss, the bone loss, heart disease. We need hormones to live and age well. And unfortunately, we live in a stressful, toxic world, which is constantly robbing us of these very important hormones. But as I'm experiencing now for myself, now that I'm kind of done with breastfeeding and my hormones are adjusting once again, I'm even more a believer of how important hormones really are for longevity, but for quality of life.
So, what I find amazing, in case anyone is kind of out of touch with youth today, we know that girls are starting their menstrual cycles earlier and earlier. I know that when I was a kid, it was like 13, 14 years old. Nowadays, what's the average age that you see?
I mean, 11, I've seen some 9-year olds. It's scary how early that's
Mhm.
happening. And it's because of the hormones they're exposed to in the toxic environment you mentioned, in the foods we're consuming. We're consuming a lot of dairy products, a lot of meat that I know cows have been injected with growth hormones. So it's really pretty scary.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So now let's turn our sights on where we're at today. A woman, let's say 50 years old, um, when we find ourselves in menopause, when does menopause really begin, right? This whole perimenopausal space. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
So it can really start happening. What I find in my client population is in the 30s, progesterone starts to decline. It's the first hormone that
Mm.
just starts going down, and that can lead to very heavy bleeding, painful cycles, a lot of PMS and anxiety and poor sleep. So many patients are then, well, some of them are recommended hysterectomies for the heavy bleeding, which is the worst worst case scenario.
Wow.
Most of these women, if we can get in time, we can help to boost the progesterone levels first, so they can prevent unnecessary surgeries, whatnot. But I see in the 30s women start to experience symptoms. Some can last until the 40s, some 50s, but I've seen perimenopause symptoms start as early as in the 30s in many of my patients.
Mm. So in clinical practice, do you test women for hormones? When do you start testing?
Absolutely. I think the earlier the better. I tell many of
Mm.
my menopausal patients to get their adolescent daughters tested. It would be great if we could track trends, if we could see our levels in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, so we would know if our levels were declining. In the absence of testing, we're just essentially guessing. We don't know if the levels are declining. So I'm a huge advocate for hormone testing.
That is really cool. I've never thought of it that way, but you're right. We always associate clinically, like we associate testing with menopause, right? Or sometimes when we start to experience menopausal symptoms, maybe in our 40s, that's when usually a gynecologist will order some tests or but I think more and more women are getting more and more proactive in understanding that these are tests that you can run, you can find practitioners that are thinking very much like you, like, let's back it up and start looking at these things sooner so we can follow it. So let's talk about estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, kind of that dance and how it evolves as a woman ages and things we start to experience as those things start to decline so that women know what to look for at what point in their life, roughly, knowing that it's different for everyone.
Sure. So again, usually, this is not always the case, but usually, partially because we live in a more estrogen dominant environment, we're exposed to so many xenoestrogens. Estrogen is not the first hormone to go. It's really usually progesterone that starts declining. So a lot of women start experiencing lack of sleep, the heavy bleeding, like I mentioned, more painful cycles, just anxiety and PMS. So those are symptoms to monitor for with low progesterone. As
Mm.
testosterone starts to decline, a lot of women feel that they're losing their muscle mass. Their endurance is reducing, their stamina, they can't stay up till 9 o'clock at night. They're tired. Their recovery after exercise is really poor. They just can't have the muscle gain that they used to. And a lot of times women will have depression. A lot of my patients, my female patients who are receiving testosterone report just better sense of well-being on hormones, even on testosterone, that it really lifts their mood. So if they kind of start to feel depressed, rather than opt for an antidepressant, even testosterone can help. And then finally, when estrogen starts to decline, that's when a lot of the vasomotor symptoms happen. So the hot flushes, the night sweats, the vaginal dryness, memory fog, but normally, I don't see estrogen decline first. It's usually progesterone, many times then testosterone, and then estrogen in that progression. But everybody's different.
Mm. Yeah. And let's be clear, just for women, when we're talking about replacing testosterone, that doesn't mean you take a little nip off of your husband's
No.
testosterone cream because they're very different dosages between
Yes.
women and men,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Good point.
Yeah. So, all right. So now let's dive in deep, right? Because I know estrogen is probably one of the bigger concerns. When we talk about hormones, we think of hormone related cancers, breast cancer, uterine cancer, even colon cancer. So let's talk about the concern that may be founded or unfounded, what to look for, and then what impact does estrogen play on that? Like, how does this evolve, and what role does our lifestyle play in it, right?
Sure. You have to hold me accountable here. That was a loaded
That was a
question.
big question. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So anytime we talk about estrogen, patients think cancer. Oh, I'm nervous about cancer, right? And that's because of the Women's Health Initiative study that was done on almost 17,000 women using synthetic oral estrogens, and there was an increased cardiovascular risk. There was increased risk of estrogen-related cancers, and so the study was stopped. Now, the number one most prescribed drug after that trial was an antidepressant, right? So a lot of women were
Oh,
left
wow.
without answers. They were left not hormonally sound and instead given medication, and that wasn't the correct approach. But because of fear, women weren't given hormones. And flash forward now, many doctors still are concerned giving hormones because of that study. But what we have to realize is we can't compare apples to apples. We can't compare what is available now, the bioidentical natural hormones, with the synthetic. And we can kind of talk about the difference here. So, again, what was used in that study primarily was Premarin, which was pregnant mare's urine, horse urine. It was conjugated equine horse estrogen taken by mouth in a pill. Anything you take by mouth is going to have to go through your gut and your liver. And what we know now, and what I studied through my doctorate, is probably what's a more important variable than is estrogen is really how the body's detoxifying or eliminating the estrogen. So how our liver is handling that estrogen that we're given. And if it's horse urine, that's going to be more difficult for our body to detoxify. It's going to leave us with more side effects than more good. So what I try to do in my patients is not replicate what was done in that study, right? We don't want to increase risks, but we do not want patients to be unnecessarily medicated with antidepressants. We do want to give them the hormones they need. So based on testing, we can then give plant-based hormones. We can give an estrogen that's from a yam. Sometimes soy is used, but I prefer yam. And those hormones will fit like a key fitting in a keyhole. And I describe this in my book. I actually have pictures of synthetic hormones and natural hormones and our hormone receptors and how they should fit appropriately. Synthetic hormones they don't fit appropriately. Natural hormones should fit. They should be biologically identical to what your body should be making. And so natural bioidentical hormones should not increase risk of cancer because they have a different molecular structure, but also based on the delivery method that we're providing them to the patient through. So for estrogen, I prefer to not give oral estrogen because I don't want to mimic what was done in that study. I'm okay with topical gels and creams. Sometimes we will give sublingual lozenges, kind of like how you would take B12 under your tongue, you can take estrogen under your
Mhm.
tongue. You're going to swallow a little bit of that, but the dose is so much smaller than an oral dose. I'm okay with that. And then I also provide hormone replacement therapy using pellets, which are kind of like little grains of rice that we implant under the fatty tissue in the lower back or upper bottom area. And those are cleared entirely through the kidneys. They don't go through the gut or liver at all. So there are steps we can take to assure the safety of the hormone we're giving. So we're not replicating what was done in that study. Therefore, that fear hopefully will be gone.
So let's talk about that because that's a heavy topic to unpack, which is the idea that if you take estrogen orally, then it's got to go through your liver and it's
Mm-hmm.
treated like a chemical and
Mm-hmm.
it's detoxified
Yep.
through the liver like a chemical and it leaves a residue or metabolites behind, right? So let's talk about the way estrogen leaves the body because this is when I learned this, everyone, this changed my thinking about how much control I have actually over my hormones and my longevity, right? So this was a big one for me. So I want to share it.
So what I studied through my doctorate, I read a lot of papers. I wanted to learn about this estrogen metabolism concept, right? Because everything we consume, everything we breathe in, we eat, has to be eliminated or metabolized, detoxified by our body, right? We're going to eventually excrete that, and that includes estrogen, the estrogen our body's making, and the estrogen we're taking or exposed to in the environment. So fortunately, there are tests which I think can better predict cancer risk than just plain estrogen levels. There are
Right.
urine tests that exist, several companies offer this, that can show us how estrogen is being cleared through the body. So estradiol converts to estrone, and then estrone, which is more dominant in postmenopausal women, which is why they are at greater risk for estrogen related cancers than our younger women who are more estradiol dominant. Estrone has to be cleared through one of three major pathways. So there's the 2-hydroxyestrone pathway, the 16, and there's a 4 pathway. And I know that's a mouthful, but if you are able to get this test done, a functional medicine provider like myself can help you interpret those results. So essentially, what you're looking for is you want to have a high 2 and a low 16. um,
Mhm.
Marker. So the better that ratio of the good to bad, the 2 to the 16, we have shown patients with those higher ratios have lower risk of developing estrogen related cancers. What can influence that are cruciferous vegetables specifically. So broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, kohlrabi, any cruciferous vegetable is a vegetable that if you cut the stem on, there's a crux or a cross there. You'll see then
Mhm.
that means that vegetables in that family. So those are
Oh
the
my
ones.
gosh. I never knew that. I have a master's in nutrition. I never realized that cruciferous was named because of the cross that's in the
So
vegetable.
So like spinach
That's
is not a
cool.
cruciferous vegetable. Spinach is
No,
good.
right.
Spinach, but kale would be. uh, so you want to eat those vegetables.
That's
What that's going to
great.
do is increase the 2 and reduce the 16, which is shown to be more problematic. Now, some patients say, I get gassy, I get bloated, I can't eat those foods. Well, there are supplements you can take. Diindolylmethane dim is an extract from cruciferous vegetables. It's kind of like eating 6 pounds of those vegetables per day. So that supplement exists, and time again is it has been shown in the literature, and I've seen it in my patients to improve that ratio. So DIM is very protective when we think of estrogen cancer risk, and I put all my patients who are taking estrogen and all my male patients who are on testosterone on DIM, because even testosterone can convert to estrogen in male patients.
Mhm.
So we still want to make sure they have men don't have breasts, but they have prostates and colons, so we want to make sure that they're also protected from those estrogen related cancers. Now there's
Whew, that's a lot.
yeah,
So wait, let's take a second and
yeah,
talk about the 2, the 4, and the 16, because I know we're throwing numbers around and long
yeah,
words, but
yeah,
here's how I learned it. I learned it as 3 different roads. Think of them as highways out of your body,
yeah.
and the 2 highways clean and well lit and taken care of, and so you're less likely to have any accidents or any problems on that road, where, like, the 16 is poorly
Bad.
lit, potholes everywhere, garbage on the sides of the road. And so when we think of how estrogen leaves the body, it can leave things behind that are dirty, right?
Mhm.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the things, the
Yeah,
metabolites that are left over. And so when the estrogen travels down this clean highway, the 2, which is what we want more of, it tends to not cause problems, which is what I think you're getting at, which is it reduces our risk of having
correct.
hormone related cancers or estrogen related cancers.
That's a great analogy. That's what
Yeah.
DIM and that's what cruciferous vegetables do. They increase the chances of estrogen being cleared through that clean
Mhm.
highway, that clean pathway, and reduce the
Mhm.
16. But those aren't the only pathways. You mentioned the four.
Oh,
Also,
yeah, let's talk about the
so,
4. Let's hear it.
there are a couple other pathways here. The I'll say that your body goes through without getting too detailed and talking about hydroxylation and all these pathways, if you
Yes,
could
yes,
just remember the four, we'll say that. There is a marker called 4-hydroxyestrogen as well, and that's one that you also do not want to be high. If high, that can lead to DNA damage, which can lead to cancer. Now, if it's found to be high on a test, that's okay. Unlike genetics that we can't change, we can still alter these metabolites with all the lab findings for the better to reduce risk. So, what can really protect one from DNA damage is antioxidants. So, if you have been found to have a very high 4-hydroxyestrogen on your test, the literature shows N-acetylcysteine, which boosts glutathione. Resveratrol can be very protective. We know there are a lot of other antioxidants that are well studied, but those are ones that I do put my patients on who have an elevated 4-hydroxyestrone.
that's great. Yeah, isn't that interesting? I didn't realize that the 4 was DNA damage. That's
It can
and a
lead
lot of
to,
things
it can lead
can
to,
lead to DNA
yeah,
damage,
yeah,
which is more than just cancer, right? It's
yeah.
I mean, our longevity is dictated by our
Chronic disease.
DNA.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
all of
I also want to mention methylation because methylation is also a detoxification process in the body. We're constantly methylating things, including our estrogen. And so that's also something that we can test on a urine hormone assessment. If patients are very poor methylators, then we can put them on methyl donors, things with methyl in the name, like methylcobalamin, which is B12, trimethylglycine, methylfolate, which is B9. Those can improve methylation. So that's a whole nother pathway that when we think of how estrogen is cleared through the body, which you can assess on a test, which is very important. So when we think of what you want to find, again, in summary, you want to see a high to a low 16, a low 4-hydroxyestrone, but you want your methylation, your methoxy, even your 4-methoxyestrogens to be higher.
I love that. That's great. And so let's just talk names. What tests do you like in terms of hormone and saliva?
I always try to meet my patients where they're at financially. So depending on if they have insurance or not, we'll kind of determine who we're going to use. But I love Precision Analytical's Dutch test, the dried urine hormone test. So if it's in their budget, that's the best test. I
I'm a
love that
big
test.
fan. Yeah,
So
I
I
do too. I
highly
think it's
encourage.
great.
One thing to take into consideration with any testing, if you are cycling, you want to make sure that you do the testing during the luteal phase, the latter half of the cycle, like one a day's 19, 20, or 21 in a 28-day cycle. If you're postmenopausal, it doesn't matter. You can test any day.
Mhm.
Genova Diagnostics also has a great urine hormone test, which is a little more affordable for patients with insurance. So some of my patients do that test. Both are wonderful tests.
Mhm.
They provide results in color with little graphs that are easy to understand. So I highly encourage all the viewers at some point to get that test done. It's great for seeing your hormone levels, but also looking at your future estrogen cancer related risk, which can then empower you to make changes if found unfavorable.
And that actually applies whether you're taking hormones or not.
Right.
You
Right.
should, as a woman that's reaching, the middle of life, it's always makes sense to have your hormones checked, especially understanding the way you detoxify your hormones, the way your hormones leave your body, whether it's through methylation or through one of those 2, 4, 16 pathways. Those are super important to know because you could essentially change your path, change your road, and
Trajectory that you're
which
headed down.
changes your outcome. Yeah, it changes your life.
And
These are important tests. That's really why I wanted to dive in deep on them with you because they're just so important for people to understand whether they're interested in hormone replacement therapy or not.
right. And even when we think of younger women, if women have had abnormal pap smears, fibroids, cysts, those are all related to poor estrogen metabolism. Endometriosis,
Mhm,
which is what I had, uh,
mhm.
related to poor estrogen metabolism. So even regardless of the age, I would say this testing is appropriate and very valuable.
I will say this, and I don't speak about it very much, but so for me personally, I had infertility for years, and well, I had infertility indefinitely. And so I went through all the different procedures, all the different testing, everything. Never, I mean, this was a while ago, right? Because I'm 51 now, but so this was over 20 years ago. Never was I offered this kind of testing of nothing about what I knew. I was unaware of, you fought when you're assigned to a reproductive endocrinologist and you get so severe in infertility that you're at this point. Both of my children were in vitro fertilization
Yeah,
because there was just no answer. It was unexplained infertility till the very end, right?
sure.
Still remains
Yeah.
unknown. And so I strongly believe that if I had had a Dutch test or one of the
Mhm.
Genova tests to be able to see the pathways and understand where my hormones were, that would have made a significant difference for me. So,
Well, I
fantastic.
celebrate with you that you were able to use
I
technology, that you
know.
have children, so blessings, that's wonderful.
It was
And
wonderful.
I
Yes.
within functional medicine or integrated medicine, I should say, we appreciate that approach exists, right? That was a solution for you to get the answer that you needed. But I also get frustrated, as you are likely looking back, that so many women suffer and they are never tested. Hormones are
Mm-mm.
never
They're tested to make
explored.
sure they're
Yeah.
not in menopause, right? They do the FSH and the
Mhm.
LH, and they just look at the basics. But I think that's because the field in general of infertility is designed to kind of override your body. So they almost
Mhm.
don't care where you're starting from.
Mhm.
They're just going to kind of overpower it with hormones so that whatever you're contributing to the mix doesn't matter.
I too
I
did
feel like
a couple different IVF consults at University of Iowa, and I just felt like there's more to my story. I mean, there's more here. I mean, this has to be explored. And thankfully, I had the functional medicine knowledge, so I knew I need to
yep.
explore more. I need to explore more, and that's a whole long story. I'll write a book about that someday.
Same here, because I have since learned that gluten, for
Yeah,
me and so
me
many
too.
of the patients that I worked with, had such a significant role in
Mhm.
infertility. Gluten is probably the easiest elimination
Mhm.
that someone can do, and give it a couple of months and see the impact. I mean, it's pretty significant.
Totally agreed. And I had been gluten free for years, but I also needed to go dairy free actually. So because dairy then
That
can
makes
feed
sense.
estrogen when we think of endometriosis that I was suffering with, I needed to get the dairy out. So that
And
made
the
I think
inflammation, right? I mean, endometriosis is inflammation, so that's amazing.
exactly.
The other interesting thing that I want to point out, because I know for those of us that have spouses and significant others, we joke around about the dad bod. If you haven't seen it, it's the larger belly. It might be a little bit of fatty tissue in the breast area, right? My kids will call it moobs. But what's interesting is that what we're looking at is estrogen, right? And that's usually when you talked about estrogen, or when you talked about testosterone converting into estrogen,
Mhm.
this is what's happening in America. We see it. You can go to the beach, you'll see tons of it.
Yep. Especially, yeah, a good example is a man with a big beer belly. I mean, that's estrogen. Fat secretes an enzyme called aromatase, and aromatase converts testosterone to estrogen. So losing weight is a great way to lower your estrogen and raise your testosterone. But in many of my patients, we have to give them natural aromatase inhibitors. And DIM,
Mhm.
which we mentioned, is one of those. DIM can help prevent the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. So starting in a lot of my young patients, male patients, we put them on DIM to help. And I,
Mhm.
I am a fan of hormone replacement therapy, especially in women who are truly postmenopausal, who have had hysterectomies. They need hormones to feel better. So I'm all about that. But I'm also about starting in the younger population using some nutrients to preserve hormone function. And again, in men, reduce the chance their testosterone's going the wrong way, converting to estrogen.
Absolutely. I think that's critical to understand. So the cool thing is to share, you could share this podcast with grandchildren, children, yourself, with friends, family, because it applies to women throughout all the areas of their lives, and what we can do. The other thing I want to segue off of was when we talked about testosterone converting to estrogen. That's an easy one to see and a really easy one to understand. Women are a little bit more complex. We have
Sure.
different kinds of symptoms, but I like it. I like the analogy, or I like the example of testosterone converting to estrogen and the way we can see it and what it manifests as, because lifestyle, the way we exercise, the way we eat, all of these things, whether we smoke, if we drink alcohol, how often, all of those things can contribute to how these hormones convert to one another, or deplete or increase? So maybe just take a moment and talk about that, because I think that's another super empowering thing, right?
Sure. So I alluded to earlier that I don't like dairy because cows have been injected with growth hormones, whatnot. So even when you choose to purchase beef from cow, you do want to purchase organic meat if at all possible. I live in the Midwest, so driving to work to my office this morning, I was surrounded by cornfields. Right, there are pesticides and herbicides floating all around in the air. So if I roll my windows down, I'm inhaling those. Those toxins alone can also bind to estrogen receptors and cause harm. With dinner, with any of your meals, if you're drinking or eating out of plastic, even ketchup comes in plastic, baby formula can come in plastic. Those plastics, unfortunately, can leach into our foods and our waters and whatnot. That's why you should never drink out of plastic water bottle that's been sitting in a hot car because the plastic can leach into the water. Then we drink it and we get, unfortunately, those estrogenic like effects happening in our body. We really need to be cautious about the decisions we make with the foods we eat, what we put in our body, and even what we put on our skin. So most people are now aware of parabens and phthalates and sulfites and all these sort of bad chemicals. But the reason they have a bad rap is because of the estrogen-like properties. So choosing to purchase skincare and makeup and deodorant and body wash and hair care, any of our personal care products, even shaving cream in men that are safe, uh, as evidenced by, you can use like a screening tool. You can go to the Environmental Working Group Skin Deep Cosmetics database. You can look up the toxicity, the ranking of those products as far as endocrine disruption is concerned. But choosing safe products will help assure that they're not disrupting our hormone pathways. So
Oh,
choosing, yeah,
let's make sure we put that link in our show notes, because we'll make sure that's available. That's a great resource to be able to look
yes,
up the products that you use in your own home every day.
yes.
Mm.
Especially products that you're going to put on your skin for a long period of time. So, like a lotion, a moisturizer that you're just going to let sit on your skin, all day long or all night. Those and deodorants, those things are really important to choose safe products for.
Wow, that's amazing. There's so many aspects of our hormones that we actually control. And so I think I'm so delighted that we were able to talk about that and really hit it home that, cruciferous vegetables, limiting alcohol, looking at the products that we use. There was a time where it was common that people would just buy cases and cases of bottled water and leave it in the garage and would use it, take 6 bottles and put it in the fridge while it's out there baking in the heat.
Mhm.
Um, Hopefully we're beyond that, right? But that's probably the most obvious way that women are getting things like BPA and other plastics and chemicals and hormone
Yep.
disruptors.
And fragrance.
So
I forgot to mention fragrance, but that's a huge one. Fragrance is just a dirty word for lots of nasty synthetic chemicals. It sounds pretty. Fragrance sounds pretty, but it's not. It wreaks havoc on our
yes.
body. And these are the reasons why young women are developing and having their cycles so much earlier. So the audience can take this advice for themselves, but then for future generations, right? Let's also educate future generations on making these safe swaps, choosing healthy products so that that generation isn't as negatively affected as we have.
Yeah, I would say having my daughter is 15, and I'm gonna say the Bath and
Mhm.
company, if you think about, if you've got children or grandchildren in that age demographic, think about the influence that that product line alone has on our young girls. Um, think of all the bottles of the sprays and the lotions and the body washes and the shampoos and all of that stuff, all of those chemicals.
Mhm.
Um, contained lots of fragrance and
Very
questionable
dangerous. Now,
chemicals.
and
Yeah.
if you're listening to this and now you're depressed because you've been using those products, know that you can make the changes, but also there are functional medicine providers like myself who can work with you to put you through a detox to help clean your body of those toxins. And research has shown herbicides and pesticides, if you quit consuming them, they will be excreted by your body. So in a matter of time, you will be able to clear out your toxic load. So don't let this be depressing. Let this be encouraging and empowering. The
That's
change.
right. It's never too late to start,
Right,
right?
right.
Especially because I want to just highlight one thing too while we're talking, which is so often women with symptoms of anxiety and depression, um, and mood swings, the first reflex of practitioners is to reach for prescription medication that are anti-anxieties, antidepressants, and things like that.
Mhm.
Listen to your body. and know that even just based on what Dr. Stephanie's talking about today, there is very often a hormonal imbalance that's underlying that. And just finding a practitioner, ask them, any practitioner that specializes in anti-aging or functional medicine, I find are the first line of practitioners that really understand the hormone pathways and how to work with natural and bioidentical hormones as well. Um,
Totally agreed. So through my whole book, I'm trying to educate the audience or the consumer on how to rebuild their health, right? So chapter 6 is about how to rebuild their hormone system. The last chapter of the book is all about finding a contractor, finding a functional medicine provider to help you personalize a plan to build your health. So it sounds like we both have training through A4M, American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And anyone watching this can go to A4M's website and you can search the provider directory to find a practitioner who has taken similar training as we have in your zip code in your area. So go to a4m.com. You can also research the Institute for Functional Medicine and look at their provider directory. Find someone either close to you who can help you assess for these hormone imbalances, or there are providers who also see clients virtually. Like I also see patients virtually as well. So hope exists. You just have to find the contractor to help you rebuild your health.
I love that analogy of a contractor. And that URL is ifm.org if you're interested in finding a functional medicine provider. So that is fantastic. So, Dr. Stephanie, I just want to say also, in addition to your book, Your Longevity Blueprint, which is available, we'll have the link in the show notes at evolvingageless.com. In addition to that, she also has top 3 tips to boost your hormones naturally. It's a PDF, it's a download. We'll also have that in the show notes, which talks about fixing nutritional deficiencies, talking about this idea of detox, which is such an overused word, but it's such a biological process. So
Mm.
definitely check that out and understand it. And then also focusing on reducing stress, which we could spend a whole nother topic on. But with that in mind, if I were to ask you, what is your number one piece of advice for women that are trying to live ageless? What would you say?
Reduce stress. So I'm preaching to myself here because I've had a very fast paced life, which has been good, building my practice, whatnot. But it is good to take time and smell the roses. So stress is our body's biggest hormone hijacker. It will rob you of progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. It will age your skin. It will age your body. It is not good. So find, like you said, we could do a whole podcast on how to reduce stress, and that's different for each person, whether they're doing yoga, meditation, listening to music. I think positive affirmations, having a gratitude journal, deep breathing, there are just so many techniques and tools available. But it's really important that every day, just like how you're brushing your teeth, hopefully, again, back to you're maintaining your home, you're hopefully maintaining your body and brushing your teeth. You got to be do something for, have to be incorporating something for stress reduction daily. It needs to be part of your routine. And so that's something that I'm still working on, but something that's been very important for my health. And that's my absolute best piece of advice, is to help really patients reduce stress in their life.
I love that. You did mention that you were just finished up breastfeeding. I found that during breastfeeding is a very stress reducing period of time because you're not going anywhere. You get to hold a baby. It was a really relaxing period of time. So now it's time for you to pick back up with your meditation practices and your
Get back
yoga.
to yoga. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Get back to yoga, even gardening, dancing,
Yeah.
anything that brings you pleasure, I think is just great advice on that too.
Agreed.
So, wow, so many great actionable items here. And just like you said, here's what I love about it. You said, I'm still working on it. And that is the most important thing, I think, for all of us to understand is that we named this podcast Evolving Ageless for that reason, because we can't all turn the ship around overnight and start doing everything perfectly. That in and of itself is too stressful. So we pick and choose things one at a time that we can just slowly evolve into this optimal example, these optimal examples of health and vitality. And those things over time collect up and compound in a positive way. And it helps us all live ageless, right?
Well said.
That's great. So Dr. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here today. You are just brilliant. Your patients in Iowa, Hiawatha, Iowa. So if you live anywhere near there, I think you should be searching. We'll put the link to your practice actually in the show notes as well for those of you that are local. But so excited to have you on the show today. And you're just such a wealth of knowledge. And hopefully you'll come back and join us and we'll talk about so many other aspects of health.
I would love to.
Wonderful. All right, everyone. That's it for this week. Join me next week, same time, same place. See you soon. And in the meantime, keep on living ageless.